John Callahan lived a simple, peaceful life on his family's ranch, a place steeped in history and memories. The land had been in his family for over 150 years, passed down from generation to generation like a cherished heirloom. It wasn't just property, it was home. Every tree, every fence, and every corner of the sprawling ranch held stories of laughter, hard work, and love. John couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But peace has a way of being disrupted when greed enters the picture. A few years ago, developers moved into the area, transforming the once quiet countryside into an upscale gated community. They called it Pine Ridge Estates, complete with manicured lawns, shiny new houses, and strict rules enforced by a homeowners association, HOA. At first, John thought nothing of it. After all, his ranch was miles away from their pristine streets. But soon enough, he realized that the HOA's reach extended far beyond what anyone expected. The trouble began with small complaints. Letters started arriving at John's door, written in formal language but dripping with thinly veiled hostility. The HOA accused him of violating community guidelines. Things like livestock making too much noise or dust from his dirt roads drifting onto their perfect sidewalks. John found these accusations absurd. His ranch had been there long before Pine Ridge Estates even existed. Still, he tried to keep the peace, ignoring most of the letters and addressing minor issues when necessary. But one person refused to let things go: Eleanor Grayson, the president of the HOA. She was a force to be reckoned with, sharp-tongued, cunning, and utterly relentless. To Eleanor, John's refusal to bow to her demands wasn't just inconvenient, it was personal. In her eyes, his stubbornness undermined her authority and stood in the way of progress. She wanted his land, not because she needed it, but because she couldn't stand the idea of someone defying her. Eleanor began escalating her tactics. She rallied other homeowners, painting John as a nuisance who didn't belong in their polished neighborhood. Some residents believed her lies, while others stayed silent, unwilling to challenge her. Local officials, swayed by Eleanor's charm and influence, started siding with the HOA. Fines piled up, inspections became more frequent, and pressure mounted on John to sell his land. Despite the mounting tension, John remained steadfast. He knew deep down that this fight wasn't really about noise or dust. It was about control. Eleanor saw his ranch as a blot on her otherwise flawless community, and she would stop at nothing to erase it. But John wasn't about to hand over his family's legacy without a fight. Little did Eleanor know, her obsessive pursuit of his land would lead to consequences she could never have anticipated. As days turned into weeks, the air grew thick with hostility. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, unsure whether to sympathize with John or side with Eleanor. Meanwhile, John prepared himself for whatever came next. He had no idea how far Eleanor would go, or how far he'd have to go to protect what mattered most. One thing was certain: this battle was far from over. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the sun dips low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch. John had just finished feeding the horses and was walking back to the house when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. He turned to see a car pulling into his driveway. Eleanor Grayson's car. His stomach tightened. Eleanor rarely visited unless she wanted something, and her visits always left him feeling uneasy. She stepped out of the vehicle, her sharp heels clicking against the stones as she approached him. Her usual polished appearance, perfectly styled hair, expensive clothes, was marred by the wild look in her eyes. John could tell right away that this wasn't going to be another routine complaint about noise or dust. Something was different tonight. "John," she said, her voice cold and clipped, "we need to talk." He crossed his arms, standing his ground. "About what, Eleanor?" "You've made your feelings clear enough through all those letters." Ignoring his sarcasm, she took a step closer, her expression hardening. "You know exactly what this is about. Your refusal to cooperate has gone on long enough. I'm done playing games." Before John could respond, she reached behind her back and pulled out a pistol. His heart skipped a beat as he stared at the weapon in her hand. For a moment, The world seemed to freeze. The sound of crickets chirping in the distance felt deafening against the tension crackling between them. "I didn't want it to come to this," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with anger. "But you leave me no choice. Sell me your land, or else." John's mind raced. Part of him wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. A gun-wielding HOA president demanding his century-old ranch. But fear kept him rooted in place. He knew better than to underestimate Eleanor. She was unpredictable, and her desperation made her dangerous. Forcing himself to stay calm, John locked eyes with her. "You really think threatening me is going to work?" he asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This ranch isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever." Eleanor's grip on the gun tightened. "Don't test me, John. You're outnumbered here. Everyone in Pine Ridge wants you gone. You're holding us back." John shook his head slowly, refusing to let her see how shaken he was. "If that's true, then maybe you should focus less on me and more on fixing whatever problems you have in your own community." The two stood there in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Eleanor lowered the gun slightly, though her glare remained unwavering. "This isn't over," she spat before turning on her heel and marching back to her car. Tires screeched as she sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. Once she was gone, John exhaled deeply, his legs feeling like jelly beneath him. He knew he couldn't ignore what had just happened. Eleanor had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. But calling the police wouldn't be enough. He needed proof of her aggression, evidence that would expose her for who she truly was. As he stood there under the fading light of day, an idea began to form in his mind. If Eleanor thought she could intimidate him into giving up his land, she had severely underestimated him. This wasn't just about saving his ranch anymore. It was about taking back control and making sure Eleanor paid for her actions. The encounter with Eleanor left John shaken, but it also ignited a fire within him. He knew he couldn't let her threats go unanswered. This wasn't just about protecting his land anymore. It was about proving that no one could bully him out of what rightfully belonged to his family. But how do you fight someone who holds so much power in the community? The answer came to him late one night, as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of HOA letters and legal notices piled in front of him. If Eleanor thought she could use fear and manipulation to win, John would show her that brains and strategy could triumph over brute force. The first step was gathering information. John hired a private investigator, a sharp-eyed man named Frank, who had a reputation for uncovering secrets even the sneakiest people tried to hide. "I need everything," John told him firmly. "Anything that shows Eleanor isn't as clean as she pretends to be." Frank got to work immediately, digging into Eleanor's past and combing through public records, bank statements, and old business dealings tied to Pine Ridge Estates. What they discovered was more shocking than John had imagined. Eleanor's hands weren't just dirty. They were caked in mud. It turned out she'd been embezzling funds from the HOA for years, siphoning money meant for community improvements into her own pocket. She used bribes to sway local officials, ensuring they looked the other way whenever complaints arose about Pine Ridge Estate's aggressive tactics against neighbors like John. There were whispers of shady real estate deals, too. Properties purchased below market value under suspicious circumstances. All this evidence painted a picture of a woman who thrived on control and corruption, using her position as HOA president to serve herself rather than the community. Armed with these revelations, John decided it was time to strike back, but not directly. Confronting Eleanor head-on wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he devised a plan that would hit her where it hurt most: her power base. He began quietly buying properties inside Pine Ridge Estates. At first, it seemed impossible. He didn't have endless cash, and many homeowners weren't eager to sell their fancy homes. But John played the long game, offering fair prices and targeting those who were dissatisfied with Eleanor's leadership or struggling financially. Slowly but surely, he acquired house after house. Each property purchase gave him something invaluable: Voting rights in the HOA. In Pine Ridge Estates, every homeowner had a say in decisions, including electing board members and approving major changes. With each new home under his name, John gained more influence. Neighbors whispered among themselves, wondering why an outsider suddenly cared so much about their community. Some speculated he was planning revenge. Others assumed he wanted to turn things around. Whatever their thoughts, no one suspected the full extent of his plan, not even Eleanor. As weeks passed, John grew closer to achieving his goal. He attended HOA meetings, staying quiet at first, observing the dynamics between residents, and watching Eleanor manipulate votes to maintain her grip on power. He bided his time, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained oblivious, still convinced she held all the cards. Little did she know, the very foundation of her authority was crumbling beneath her feet, and John Callahan was the one pulling the strings. When the time came, he would reveal his hand, toppling her empire piece by piece. The day of the emergency HOA meeting arrived, and John walked into the Pine Ridge Estates clubhouse, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Eleanor had called the meeting herself, claiming it was urgent to discuss ongoing issues with his ranch. She likely intended to rally support for another round of attacks against him, but John knew this was his moment to turn the tables. The room buzzed with murmurs as residents took their seats around a large wooden table. Some glanced at John curiously. He rarely attended these meetings, let alone looked so composed. Eleanor stood at the front, her usual air of confidence masking what John suspected was growing unease. As she began speaking, laying out her grievances about noise, dust, and property values, John listened quietly, waiting for the right time to act. When the floor opened for discussion, John cleared his throat and raised his hand. Several heads turned toward him, surprised he volunteered to speak. "I think there's something important we all need to address before we talk about my ranch," he said calmly. Pulling out a folder filled with documents, he began revealing the evidence Frank had uncovered. Bank statements showing embezzlement, emails detailing bribes, and records of shady real estate deals. Gasps rippled through the room as residents realized the extent of Eleanor's corruption. But John wasn't done yet. He then dropped the bombshell. "Thanks to recent property purchases, I now own more than half the homes in Pine Ridge Estates." A stunned silence fell over the room. Even Eleanor froze mid-sentence, her face pale. "That means," John continued, "I hold the majority vote in this HOA, and I'm calling for new leadership." Eleanor sputtered, trying to regain control. "This is ridiculous. You can't just buy your way into our community." But her protests fell flat. The homeowners present were too busy processing the truth about their president to defend her. One by one, they started voicing their frustrations, not just about Eleanor's actions, but also about the heavy-handed rules and divisive tactics that had made life unpleasant for many. With the board clearly shaken, John proposed immediate changes. First, he demanded transparency. All financial records would be audited, and monthly reports would be shared openly with residents. Next, he repealed some of the most oppressive HOA policies, like excessive fines for minor infractions. Finally, he introduced measures to foster cooperation between Pine Ridge Estates and neighboring properties, including his ranch. Residents nodded in agreement, eager for a fresh start. As the meeting wrapped up, Eleanor stormed out, fuming, while others approached John to thank him. Many admitted they'd long resented Eleanor's leadership, but never dared challenge her. Now, with John in charge, they felt hopeful for the future, though some still eyed him warily. After all, he was an outsider. They couldn't deny the positive impact he already made. Later that evening, sitting alone in his truck, John allowed himself a small smile. Taking over the HOA hadn't been part of his original plan, but it was working better than he'd hoped. For the first time since the conflict began, he felt like he was gaining ground, not just for himself, but for everyone affected by Eleanor's reign. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. Eleanor wouldn't go down without a fight, and John needed to stay vigilant. But for now, he savored the victory, knowing he'd struck a blow where it hurt most: her pride, her power, and her position. With Eleanor stripped of her power and influence, John wasted no time ensuring she faced consequences for her actions. Using the mountain of evidence he'd gathered, he filed formal complaints with local authorities, accusing her of embezzlement, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. The documents painted a damning picture of corruption and abuse, and it didn't take long for law enforcement to launch an investigation. Detectives began interviewing residents of Pine Ridge Estates, many of whom were eager to share their stories now that Eleanor's grip on the community had loosened. Some recounted how she pressured them into selling their homes at unfairly low prices, while others spoke about the unreasonable fines they'd been forced to pay. Others still revealed how she'd used intimidation tactics to silence dissenters. Bit by bit, the web of lies and deceit she'd built around herself started unraveling. Weeks later, the hammer finally fell. Early one morning, police arrived at Eleanor's house with a warrant for her arrest. Neighbors gathered outside as officers led her away in handcuffs, her once immaculate appearance replaced by disheveled hair and a look of disbelief. Word spread quickly through Pine Ridge Estates and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, turning Eleanor's downfall into a cautionary tale about greed and unchecked ambition. For John, watching her being taken away was both satisfying and surreal. He hadn't set out seeking revenge, but seeing justice served felt like closure. While Eleanor dealt with the fallout, John focused on rebuilding trust within the HOA. He knew that simply removing her wasn't enough. He needed to repair the damage her leadership had caused. At his first official meeting as president, he outlined a clear vision for the future: transparency, fairness, and cooperation. Residents responded positively, relieved to see someone genuinely interested in improving their lives rather than controlling them. One of his first major decisions was to reduce the oppressive fees and penalties Eleanor had imposed. Many homeowners had struggled under the weight of these financial burdens, and lowering them brought immediate relief. John also introduced community building initiatives, organizing events like potlucks, yard sales, and volunteer days to bring neighbors together. These small gestures went a long way in mending relationships and fostering a sense of unity. Perhaps most importantly, John worked to bridge the gap between Pine Ridge Estates and its surroundings, including his own ranch. He invited residents to tour his property, sharing stories about its history and explaining how traditional ranching practices coexisted with modern development. This openness helped dispel lingering stereotypes about rural landowners being obstacles to progress. Over time, attitudes shifted, and many suburbanites came to appreciate the charm and value of having a working ranch nearby. Even those who had initially opposed John warmed up to him as they saw the tangible improvements he brought to the community. Property values stabilized, disputes were resolved fairly, and tensions eased. What had once been a battleground became a place where people could live peacefully side by side. As weeks turned into months, John reflected on how far things had come. Eleanor's reign of terror was over, replaced by a spirit of collaboration and mutual respect. Though challenges remained, the transformation was undeniable. And while John never sought recognition or praise, he couldn't help but feel proud of what he'd accomplished, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. Justice had been served, and peace was finally within reach. With Eleanor out of the picture and the HOA under new leadership, life began to change for the better, not just for John, but for everyone connected to Pine Ridge Estates. For John, the absence of constant legal battles and threats allowed him to focus on what truly mattered: preserving and revitalizing his family's historic ranch. Free from the shadow of fear that had loomed over him for so long, he poured his energy into restoring the land to its former glory. He started by repairing fences that had fallen into disrepair over the years, replacing rotting wooden posts with sturdy new ones. The old irrigation system, which had been patched together with duct tape and hope, was upgraded to something modern yet sustainable. He even hired a few local workers to help clear overgrown brush and plant native grasses, ensuring the ecosystem thrived alongside his livestock. The ranch slowly transformed from a place of struggle into one of renewal, a testament to resilience and hard work. But John didn't stop there. Realizing that his ranch could serve as more than just a home, he decided to open parts of it to ecotourism. Families from nearby towns began visiting on weekends, taking guided tours to learn about the history of the land and its role in shaping the region. Kids marveled at the horses grazing in open pastures, while adults snapped photos of sunsets stretching across fields dotted with wildflowers. John shared stories passed down through generations, tales of droughts survived, triumphs celebrated, and lessons learned. These tours not only brought in extra income, but also deepened the connection between the community and the land. Meanwhile, Pine Ridge Estates flourished under John's continued leadership. With oppressive fines gone and restrictive rules relaxed, residents found themselves enjoying their homes again. Lawns no longer needed to meet impossible standards, and families could host barbecues without worrying about violating noise ordinances. A sense of freedom returned to the neighborhood, along with a spirit of camaraderie that had been missing during Eleanor's reign. Community events became a regular occurrence, drawing people together in ways they hadn't expected. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now shared meals and laughter at potluck dinners. Children played soccer in cul-de-sacs, their shouts echoing through streets that felt friendlier and safer. Even the physical appearance of the community improved. Flower gardens sprouted where barren lawns used to be, and colorful banners hung above lampposts during holidays. John's efforts to foster cooperation between Pine Ridge Estates and surrounding areas paid off too. Ranchers, farmers, and suburbanites worked together on projects like cleaning up local waterways and organizing farmers' markets. Slowly but surely, barriers broke down, replaced by mutual respect and understanding. Residents came to see John not as an outsider or adversary, but as someone who cared deeply about making things better for everyone. Even those who had initially doubted him admitted that his takeover of the HOA had been a blessing in disguise. "I never thought I'd say this," one homeowner confessed at a meeting. "But thank you, John. You've changed everything for the better." As John stood on his porch one evening, watching the golden light of sunset bathe the horizon, he felt a profound sense of peace. His fight to protect the ranch had led him down unexpected paths, teaching him valuable lessons about perseverance, justice, and the power of unity. Though the journey had been difficult, the rewards were worth every moment of struggle. For the first time in years, he could look ahead with hope instead of worry, knowing that both his legacy and his community were safe. Years had passed since the dramatic showdown with Eleanor Grayson, and John Callahan often found himself reflecting on everything he'd been through. What began as a desperate attempt to save his family's ranch had turned into a journey of resilience, strategy, and unexpected triumph. Looking back, he realized that the battle wasn't just about land or power. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Eleanor's story served as a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could bully others into submission. After her arrest, the investigation revealed even more layers of corruption than anyone had anticipated. She lost not only her position in the HOA, but also her reputation, her freedom, and ultimately, her ability to intimidate those around her. The once feared woman became a symbol of how greed and unchecked ambition could lead to ruin. For many residents of Pine Ridge Estates, seeing her brought down was both satisfying and sobering, a reminder that no one is above accountability. For John, however, the real victory wasn't defeating Eleanor. It was proving that kindness, fairness, and determination could overcome hostility and greed. By taking control of the HOA and transforming it into a force for good, he showed that leadership isn't about domination. It's about serving others and creating harmony where there was once discord. His actions inspired people to believe in the possibility of change, even in situations that felt hopeless. The ranch itself thrived under his care, becoming a beacon of sustainability and community engagement. Tourists continued to visit, drawn by its rich history and natural beauty. Local schools started organizing field trips, giving children a chance to learn about agriculture, conservation, and the importance of preserving heritage. The ranch wasn't just a home anymore. It was a bridge connecting past and present, rural traditions, and modern life. Pine Ridge Estates also evolved into something far better than it had ever been under Eleanor's rule. Property values stabilized, friendships blossomed, and disputes were resolved peacefully. Neighbors worked together to maintain shared spaces, planting trees, painting fences, and hosting events that fostered a sense of belonging. Even longtime skeptics admitted that John's unconventional methods had saved the community from itself. As John watched the sun dip below the horizon one evening, casting warm hues across the fields of his ranch, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He thought about his ancestors, the generations before him who had tilled this soil, raised livestock, and built a life here. They would be proud, he knew, not just because he'd protected their legacy, but because he'd done so with integrity and courage. He also thought about the future. His efforts had laid the groundwork for lasting peace between rural landowners and suburban developers, showing that coexistence was possible if people chose understanding over conflict. Though challenges would undoubtedly arise again, John believed the community was stronger now and better equipped to face them together. In the end, John's story was one of redemption, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. It proved that sometimes fighting back doesn't mean raising your voice louder. It means playing smarter, staying patient, and refusing to give up what matters most. As he stood there, breathing in the crisp evening air, John smiled. He had faced down a storm and emerged victorious, not with anger or vengeance, but with wisdom and grace. And that, he thought, was the greatest triumph of all.